Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Nonprofit Tidbits, presented by Alberta Community Development. Nonprofit Tidbits is a quick summarized information of nonprofit knowledge and know-how. Today, we're going to talk about nonprofit board effectiveness and organizational design. My name is Justin, and I work with the Alberta Community Development Unit. We work with the nonprofit and voluntary sector to provide training, support, and resources to those involved in the nonprofit work in Alberta. Today's webinar is split up into two parts. The first part, we're going to provide some content in the area of nonprofit board effectiveness and organizational design. The second part will provide some learned experience and lessons from the field in terms of the content we shared today. What we want you to get out of this is to strengthen your effectiveness as a board of director for a nonprofit that you're part of or even hoping to be a part of. And secondly, to look at ways to design your organization to get the work done. So, what are the skills of an effective board? I'm going to talk about 6 different skills for the effective nonprofit board. I know what you're going to say. There's probably more than 6 out there, but we want to highlight the ones that we've seen as effective in our years of experience in working with nonprofit boards across the province. The effectiveness of boards as a collective really increases when boards demonstrate skills in the following 6 areas. The first one is a contextual area. And what this is understanding and taking into account cultures, norms, and values of the organization that you govern. Second, educational. You want to be able to take the necessary steps to ensure that members are well informed about the organization, the sector, as well as the board's roles, responsibilities, and their performance. The third is interpersonal. You want to nurture the development of its members, your organization's members, attend to the board's collective welfare, and foster a sense of cohesiveness, really building a sense of team. For the fourth, it would be analytical. You want to recognize the complexities and subtleties in the issues that your organization face. And you want to draw on multiple perspectives to dissect the complex problems and synthesize the appropriate response to those problems. The fifth is political. This is accepting that one of your primary responsibilities as a board of directors is the need to develop and maintain a healthy relationship among all key constituencies. Think of this as political in the sense that your organization has many stakeholders involved in what you do. People who care about what's happening. Think of this as staff, volunteers, funders, and it could very well be folks that are holding political office as well, who care about what your organization does in the community. And finally, strategic. This is envisioning and shaping the organization's directions and helping to ensure that a strategic approach to the organization's future is available to the organization. So I'm going to summarize these 6 skills of an effective board. So the first, we talked about contextual, and this is understanding the unique context your organization is in. The second, educational, that people are well informed in your organization, that they can find information easily and get up to speed with what they need to know. The third was interpersonal. You need to be able to be concerned about your board's well-being. You are most likely a volunteer in your role, so it's helpful to get to know the people and like the people that you're working with. Fourth, analytical. This draws on the strengths and perspectives of your board of directors and allows you to make appropriate responses to the challenges that you may face. Fifth is political, building healthy relationships for all the people involved in the organization's work. And finally, strategic, shaping the organization's direction and ensuring a strong future. So we have contextual, educational, interpersonal, analytical, political, and strategic as 6 skills of effective boards. Finally, we're going to move into organizational design, also known as how do we get the work done. How an organization accomplishes its work that needs to be done depends on how the organization is structured, especially within a governance framework. There are 4 areas that we think you should consider. The first one is the governance framework. What are board positions? Are there committees involved? What do staff do if you have staff? What does accountability look like? The second area to consider, systems and policies in place. When does the board meet? How often? Is there usually an agenda to your meetings? How are notes stored? Who takes them in the first place? What are the policies and procedures that the board and staff have to guide their work? Third, we talk about the process the board uses. How are decisions actually made? And I know a lot of boards don't go into how we make decisions, but is it a majority? Is it a consensus? What happens if there's conflict? How does a board deal with that? How is communication done? It's mostly done electronic these days through email. Does everybody have access to that? Do people text each other? Do you use a program management software like Slack or Basecamp to hold your conversations when you're not at meetings? And lastly, thinking about process, conflict of interest. If this happens, does your board know what to do? What process in place to deal with conflict of interest? In terms of the last area to consider itself is the organization, culture, mindset, and skills. And this is something that's unique to your organization. What do you know about the inner workings of your organization that helps get the work done? Sometimes you may not know this right away. Sometimes if you're a new board member, you get a sense of how that looks like, but it definitely plays a role in how an organization accomplishes its work. The framework and structure is developed by the board, but it can change over time depending on where you are in terms of your organization lifecycle. For example, a board may start out with no staff and perform administration through committees. Then it may grow and decide to hire staff, at which point the governance framework may change. An executive director may leave. It may take time to replace that individual. So again, the board must look at its structure and determine how to carry it out and work under that different circumstance. At the end of the day, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to governance and stewardship. The structure should reflect the needs of your organization and its culture. So you can Google many ways to structure your organization, and you might find something that works well for you. But here's a little exercise that I'm going to encourage you to try out before we move into the last part of our webinar here. I want to ask you, what does your organizational structure look like? If you're at home, maybe take a bunch of Post-it notes out, write all the roles of the board. You know, you may have a chair, a co-chair, a secretary. Maybe map out who's responsible for what, who is accountable to who, and what is the actual reporting structure. It's an interesting exercise to do internally with your board to see how many people think they know how an organization works. So I'm going to challenge you before I move into the next piece to try that exercise for yourself and have the discussion with your board. Is your organizational structure work for you? And what are the things that you can do to strengthen and improve it? All right, welcome everybody to the second half of board effectiveness and organizational design. We have a treat for you. We have a community development officer to talk about some of the practical things that we talked about first. And so I'm going to ask Jasmine to introduce herself, and we'll get going here.
Great. Hi, Justin. My name is Jasmine Gravette, and I am a community development officer based in Grand Prairie, and I work with Alberta Culture, Multiculturalism, and Status of Women.
Cool. Yeah, Jasmine, we know you have a lot of experience with nonprofits, both working with them as well as being a part of them. And of course, having a board of directors is a vital part of a nonprofit. And so really we're going to talk about, you know, what are some of the qualities, the strengths, what we're looking for in terms of board. And so I'm going to ask you up front, what is good governance? What do you think is important for a board to be unified in as a team?
Sure, that's a great question. That good can really take on different meanings depending on what the organization is up to and the history it has behind it. So in general, governance refers to the process of making and implementing decisions. So good governance then ensures the guidance provided by the board and the decisions it puts in place position and support the organization to best deliver on its mandate. So more specifically, I think good governance requires that a board stay ahead of the day-to-day operations of an organization and focus primarily on its future. So kind of pivoting between planning and preparing for what the staff and volunteers will likely need to carry out the day-to-day work as seamlessly as possible as the organization moves towards its goals.
And that seamless process, I mean, it may seem seamless, but we know it requires a lot of work, a lot of different skills as a board member.
So I actually have a couple of examples to illustrate what I mean by that. Strategic planning is probably one of the most common strategies. It's a formal and effective way to establish board priorities and goals to direct resource development and your investment activities, but it's generally only done every 1 to 3 years. So an example of good governance on a more ongoing basis is creating or approving policies that streamline your operations. So a purchasing policy, for example, is one that I always found really useful when I was working in nonprofit. It can authorize, say, your executive director to spend at her discretion up to a limit or within other parameters that's set by the board. So this is a really good way to ensure that the organization is responsive to the operational needs in a timely manner, while also ensuring that the board's exercising responsible financial management by, first of all, limiting the purchasing power of an authorized individual, in this case, the executive director, and second, by having a conversation as a board about the larger costs that could impact its programming or other goals, and then deciding together how best to proceed. Which also brings me back to my original points about good governance being about planning and preparing. So there's the third feature that I think is worth highlighting, and that's that a board demonstrating good governance also needs to take time to monitor and discuss how those operations are stacking up against what they'd planned and prepared for, and adjust and revamp them as needed to keep the organization in good standing with its members, its funders, and the community. So I know a lot of board members or potential board members, when they're reached out to, are a little bit intimidated by becoming a member of a board. But it's really similar to the plan, do, check, act cycle that we all go through, either consciously or unconsciously, anytime we're trying to create or improve something.
Right. So, I mean, you talked about some financials and knowing some of those things ahead of time. Is it fair to say that someone should have a strong finance background to become a board of director?
It really depends on the needs of the organization. It certainly helps to have some financial expertise on the board, whether that's the actual treasurer or maybe you have some people with strong business acumen on your board. Maybe the executive director is the person who has a lot of formal financial management skills, if there's an executive director. So it's really as diverse as the organization is. And if it isn't within the organization, then it needs to maybe be a contracted position. And maybe it's a contracted bookkeeper who advises or plays that role to make sure that the board has the information they need to make those decisions going forward.
Right. I want to talk a little about like specific qualities that board members should have. And of course, they can't have it all. But what are some things that you would be looking for in terms of a quality of a good board member?
A quality of a good board member, I think, again, looking at your board as a whole and looking for those gaps. So looking at who are we as an organization? What are we maybe lacking from a skill or quality perspective? And then seeking those out. So in general, you want all of your board members, volunteers, of course, have the best of intentions when they sign up for anything, but making sure that they're well aware of the time commitments that are going to be required of them. That when they show up, they have the confidence to ask questions, to solicit more information and exercise that good judgment when you're having conversations around the strategic direction or some policy implementation conversations. Somebody that you're looking for balance when it comes to decisions in any level of decision that you're making. So making sure that all sides, the pros and cons, the risks, the potential benefits, different relationships that people might bring, so that you've got a really well-rounded perspective anytime that you're making a decision about the organization and the future that it's striving towards.
Right. Well, tell me about this. You were talking about looking at gaps, and I know a lot of organizations, they do want people with specific skill sets and so on. How do you actually know what gaps you have as an organization?
I've always found a tool called a board matrix tool is really simple and really effective at helping to highlight where those gaps are in the board's makeup. So it's a very simple template that just lists the different directors that you have on board at that time, along with the different skill sets that you're looking for, the qualities you're hoping to have reflected on your board. So it's usually aligned with your strategic plan. So depending on what your goals are, you might be looking for different acumen, different skills from within your individual board members. And you can really simply just go across and say, do we have somebody who has some marketing skills right now? Do we have somebody who has that financial management? Do we have some legal advice or expertise on our board right now? Human resource issues. Maybe if you're really looking at revamping your staff, your organizational chart, you might be looking for somebody who's got that sort of business mindset or human resource background. So you're really just looking at what is in the future, the near future for the organization. What kind of leadership and direction does our team, whether it's volunteers or paid staff, need from the board? And do we have the skills and expertise to provide to them, or the relationships to leverage in order to get that expertise?
Right. And that's cool. We're going to try to share the board matrix, a copy of what it could look like. We'll drop a link in the description. So we talked a little bit about some of those practical skills that could be helpful. With a new board member, a prospective board member, what are some of those practical skills that maybe an organization may be looking for?
So I think first and foremost is that willingness and ability to learn and to listen to one another's ideas, to past experiences, to lessons learned, to struggles of your ED or your senior staff or volunteers, an ability to present opinions and ask questions. So in a strong recruitment process, a board member was sought for a particular reason, whether it was their knowledge, their skill, their professional experience, their life experience. Because as an aside, a good rule of thumb is that your board reflects your community, whether the community at large that you're operating within or the particular community of the membership that you're serving. So it's great to have that diversity in demographic, in different makeup, to make sure that you have a well-rounded experience and perspective that you can draw on when you're making decisions. At the end of the day, regardless, there was a reason the board wanted that particular person. So feel free to speak up, to know that there's value in your perspective. It might not actually dawn on somebody sitting around the table that they have something unique to contribute. So being a type of board member who helps to draw opinions out and solicit that input from your fellow board members is a really important skill. And it also helps to build a lot of respect on your team. An effective dialogue challenges those norms and those biases. It helps build balanced perspective, and it ensures that your board's done due diligence in gathering all of the information it can to inform the decision at hand or respond to a particular situation that it's facing. And it also, if an an executive director is on staff, it helps them to feel supported in their role as a decision maker among staff and also face the organization and the public.
Right. So we've kind of painted the picture around what an organization may be looking for in terms of their board members. Talking about good governance, quality, skills, and then there's that getting the work done piece. So the structures that are in place and so on. I don't know, do you have an experience on some good structures or how an organization sets themselves up to actually do the work?
Yeah, good structure, again, is one of those really subjective references, because the answer to this can be as broad and diverse as the organizations out there and that the work they're trying to achieve. I think it's great to have vision and dream big and be inspired, but that work needs to be achievable for an organization to be successful. So that means taking a realistic look at what the organization wants to do and the resources it has available to do it. And by resources, I mean everything: your time, your money, your people within your organization, which is the board, paid staff, your volunteers, but also those external relationships. So thinking about who can we align with in the community doing similar work, where can we partner on projects or maybe administrative tasks to help carry some of that financial burden or access resources we don't have yet. What relationships can we leverage? And one example that I can think of this that's I don't think known to a lot of organizations is your volunteers, especially when you're looking at board committees, don't have to just be your board members. And the United Way is a really great example of this. So many United Ways operate with very limited teams and budgets to ensure that the vast majority of the money that they raise goes out to the agencies that they fund. So they also operate with a volunteer board that's typically focused more on policy rather than the administrative tasks. So the time they have dedicated to hands-on work for the organization may actually be quite limited. So to close the gap between those hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars that they hope to cultivate, and the very few people they have on staff to do it, they utilize a campaign cabinet. So this is a committee of the board that usually reflects influential people in the community from various sectors of business, who then open doors to new networks of people and new opportunities for fundraising on behalf of the United Way. And then the chair of that committee usually has a designated seat on the board and reports back to the board and staff on its progress. So that's a really innovative way of expanding your reach without downloading that much more work onto the people you have on your staff or your core volunteers. So I think this is also sort of an example of an abundance mindset and how it can go a long way in creating new and innovative opportunities for success, as long as there's also adequate risk management processes and ongoing conversations along the way with the board. But really, the sky's the limit on how an organization structures itself to get things done. And also being adaptable and making sure that you're revisiting that structure from time to time to ensure that it still is relevant and is an effective and efficient use of the resources you have is an important role of the board.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point to make around having that check-in piece. Like, is it still working for our organization? Tell us more about this idea around leveraging relationships for your organizations, going kind of beyond, your internal.
Mm-hmm. So the value in extending relationships to the organization can happen at that board level, internally for sure, externally looking at fundraising, looking at building the credibility and the reputation of the organization in the community, regionally, provincially, depending on kind of the scope of the work that your organization does. Who you know matters in life, and nonprofit sector is no different. So being able to call on certain individuals who are able to open those doors, attend meetings with you, help you get your foot in the door, in the room, have your voice heard is integral to being able to do work efficiently. Sometimes what might take one person months of letter writing and calling, cold calling, and doing what they know might just be a simple phone call or coffee meeting or something with somebody else who already has that relationship established, whose name gets attention, and of those that you're trying to engage with. Also, it can be great for finding deals, finding ways of doing business more cost effectively, or opening up new volunteer pools for your organization to do something that would have otherwise cost money. So it's just, the more people you have invested in your work, the more heads you have working together, the more likely you are to come up with some innovative ways of doing your work better or bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that idea that it's not necessarily about maybe helping the board do some of their work, but also marketing your organization. And you mentioned volunteers and being able to get volunteers that way. So, hopefully people can look at beyond their internal sphere to see people in the community that can help push some of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. The organization exists to meet a need in the community. And there's a lot of people outside your organization who are invested in that, who either you don't know about or who maybe they don't even know you exist, right? So
exactly.
The more networking you can do, the more doors open, and then the possibilities that come with it. It's a great thing. That relationship building is such an important part, to not look at the success of the organization, but to flip it into the success of the impact, the social impact
Mm.
that organization can achieve. It's not about sustaining the longevity of the organization for the organization's sake, but about making the greatest impact on behalf of that organization.
Right. Well, I want to kind of end these things talking about just organizational culture, because of course every organization has their own culture. Why do you think it's important to understand your organization's culture?
So an organization's culture is such an important piece, and I'm glad that you've highlighted that here. An organization's culture is basically just the way it does business, but it sets both the tone for and is the result of how you interact with others, inside and outside of your organization. So internally, your culture is basically your values in motion. So why facilitators get you to write down those values is because they're going to define the work that you do and how it's received. So are you an organization that values innovation, open communication, collaboration, and risk-taking? So more of an abundance thinking, anything is possible kind of approach to your work? Or are you more of a results-oriented with a focus on order, staying the course with tradition, sticking with what's tried and true? And you can probably tell just from my answer which one of those I would gravitate towards. And I think that's another important part to note, that your culture is going to feed that reputation in the community and sets external expectations. So this is going to impact the type of talent that you're able to attract, your ability to partner with other organizations and collaborate with other agencies, and catch the interest of those stakeholders. So while everything we just talked about leveraging your relationships and your networks and getting people excited about your work, if they're not excited about how you do your work, it's not going to necessarily matter. You're not going to be able to get that level of engagement, and that in the long term can hurt your organization and the impact you're trying to make. But because culture is the result of this continuous feedback loop between your expectations and your actions, it can change as people come and go, as projects wrap up, or just with deliberate, mindful effort by your senior leadership. So it's really important that the board tune into the culture of its organization and consider, is it helping or hindering the impact that we're trying to make?
That's good. It's actually a great note to end on. Thank you, Jasmine, for being able to share some of your insight and experience in this. I hope people can take home something with this board effectiveness and organizational design. And so we'll catch you in the next one.
Thanks so much, Justin.